Welcome.
Thank you so much. So before any time starts today, I just want to get right out of the gate. As you can see from this topic on the title, we're dealing with something heavy today. I'm not discussing any graphic content, so don't worry about that. But if you find yourself experiencing strong emotions, as I'm sure I might, I encourage you to feel those and to feel comfortable to feel those and to not feel embarrassed. If you need to step out because you're feeling strong feelings, I will not be offended. I was waiting for my banjo lesson when the email came through. As I read that Travis Steimling had suddenly died hours before, a strange kind of quiet fell over me. Like many of us, I coped with tragedy by playing bluegrass. In the following 48 hours after Travis Steimling's death, an outpouring of support washed over those who knew Travis, particularly for those in the musicology program, which they had run, and for those in the Appalachian Music program, which they had founded. Thoughts and prayers, however, didn't help the West Virginia University Bluegrass Band find answers as they stared blankly at their future. You see, Travis Steinling had planned a sabbatical for the following semester, so no plans were in place for performances, rehearsals, or band development. With this scarily blank canvas doing no favors to an administration who had no remaining subject experts, the program found support not from an institution, but in a student-led response. This student action resulted in the preservation of the group, the establishment of a new faculty advisor, and eventually, program growth. As Lee so kindly said, my name is Isaac McCarthy, and I was enrolled in this program and working with Travis at the time of their death. So today, I'd like to chronicle the developments in the student-led response to managing this crisis, explore the successes and failures of this endeavor, and then briefly ask, what does this case study show more broadly for string bands in higher education? To do that, I'd first like to give you some information about WVU's program, then we'll move into the crisis response, and finally we'll return to those takeaways, including how I've used this experience to lay the groundwork for a new, similarly modeled program at Ohio State. So founded in 2014, the WVU Bluegrass and Old Time Band offered students a chance to develop a knowledge of string band repertoire, history, and arrangement, and also provided regular opportunities for cross-campus and cross-state collaboration. Over the years, the band would focus primarily on outreach events, doing tours across public schools in West Virginia, but they also performed for other events, including masterclasses with Charlie McCoy, opening for Sierra Hull, and playing for the Wheeling Symphony. Originally founded using a chamber music credit, the band expanded over the years, eventually gaining its own course number and an associated Appalachian music minor. In the first decade, dozens of people were involved in this program, either through the ensemble, lessons, or through the related History of Appalachian Music class. Now, at the core of this band was Travis's people first, music second mentality. This meant that the ensemble did not focus on professional level development or education, but rather on investment directly into the humans and students that made up the ensemble and larger music community. Now, this manifested in the curriculum, which was variable. Music education majors, for example, would gain experience having to arrange a song without sheet music. Non-music students would gain an opportunity to practice musical skills, and experienced pickers would be presented with level-appropriate challenges. For example, as a beginner might be tackling a more complex piece of repertoire for the first time, those advanced students might lead the rehearsal, direct the arrangement, or compose themselves. The band was also concerned with developing skills beyond those in the classroom. Time was spent discussing pedagogy, recording, dissemination, and jam skills, and this was exemplified when the group actually recorded and released an album that featured original compositions by group members. Now, Steimling, along with Enriquez, would write about this group in a 2019 article which demonstrated the decolonial approach they took in designing this curriculum. This approach was phenomenally successful and connected students to non-Western presentation of string band traditions, ensured that the band acted from an activist position, and pushed students to think critically. So in totality, the band offered an avenue into traditional music, an opportunity to develop musical skills, and a connection to a living and breathing community outside of the university doors. It also served as an avenue for research, composition, and professional development. As you can see, members of this band have gone on to win and place in the finals of, for example, Clifftop's Neo Trad contest, started their own bands, released music, which you can definitely hear on Bill Smedley's Old Time Music Hour, and presented research to the broader Appalachian Studies community. Now, today, speaking to a group of string band aficionados and educators, I don't have to justify why this form of education is beneficial or even legitimate. Rather, my hope in chronicling these developments is to honor the incredible work that Travis Steinling was able to front during just a decade of the band's existence. Now, at the time Travis passed, a cohort of 8 people, a very manageable number, were in the ensemble, and the band was actually tracking some charts in hopes of releasing another album. But simultaneously, as the life of an academic is never finished, Steinling had been working on a book and had been granted sabbatical the following spring to finish it. Unable to figure out a one-semester substitute for the band, Travis planned to take a semester off and then schedule this final recording session as kind of a documentarian approach. But after that November 2023 recording session, on a Tuesday, suddenly and at 43, Travis Steinling died. Now, if it wasn't clear by now, I worked closely with Travis. Travis was my academic advisor, my research PI, the director of my minor, and the Bluegrass Band was, without a doubt, my favorite part of the university experience. And revealing emotions in academic settings is not really typically standard procedure, but here I really want to legitimize, platform, and share my bodily ways of knowing because, put simply, after Travis's death, I was distraught. I was shaken to my core with fear, sadness, and confusion. I was not okay for a long time. And the person I was prior to their passing is long gone. But the morning after the news broke, I was crying in the hall outside of the School of Music when Professor Joshua Swiger walked by. Despite the fact that we knew each other only tangentially, they stopped in to check on me. I explained that Travis and I had just been accepted to a research program and I had funding and I didn't know what to do, and then they cut me off. Put me down as your PI and we'll figure it out later. I was stunned, called this program, and informed them I needed to switch mentors. So now, with some sort of faculty support, I pondered what to do with my degree, with my program, and was worried about the future of the band. And so I realized that due to the sudden and unique circumstances of Travis's death, no one else had the time, the skill, or the resources to support this band's development. So, approaching this situation objectively, from a student perspective, there was no clear leader. The most experienced member of our group, who actually performed for several years with a regionally touring bluegrass band, was going to student teach starting in 6 weeks and therefore unable to help. After them, I was the most senior member of the group who had been playing banjo for 18 months, and the group was almost entirely dominated at that point by undergraduates. From a faculty perspective, there was no one able or skilled to take on the band's management. The full-time music faculty at West Virginia had no experience in Appalachian music because Travis had covered that for them, and were actually already teaching full course loads. They also had a planned spring semester that already distributed Travis's normal commitments among themselves during their sabbatical. Now, the adjunct faculty who ran some of our banjo and fiddle lessons were already contracted for a certain number of hours, which were filled, and were usually only available at very specific times, often one day a week in the evening, basically eliminating any sort of scheduling. And if you've worked in the music department, you know that you need to put that time on the calendar for a large ensemble, otherwise it's not going to happen. So, scared at the potential of watching this program fold, saddened by the loss of a mentor, and swept up in my emotions, I approached Professor Swiger with an idea. We were going to run this bluegrass band under the guise of an honors project. Over the following 4 weeks, though, we first grieved Travis. We had a funeral where dozens of band members and alumni played, and we finished that fall semester by trudging into break, really truly needing a moment to ourselves. Now at home, I began the first stages of planning the band's next steps. That spring, the band did not meet as a course, but I coordinated several rehearsals with the group and also scheduled a couple of outreach shows to elementary schools in vein of the program's prior work. Throughout that semester, I also identified 3 core needs for this band. The group needed an administrative guide and reason to exist, a goal to provoke development, and an academic measure of their progress. After much reflection on what we could do, given the completely unprecedented circumstances, we came to an idea. Building on the recording experience the band had in the previous fall, we designed a plan to record an album. This addressed all the needs I had identified, and more importantly, it was attainable given our current resources. First, if we could not find another faculty advisor, Josh Schweiger agreed to act as temporary instructor of record in fall of 24. Schweiger's primary responsibilities included managing the WVU recording studio, therefore meaning that the band could, bar nothing, meet every week as a session band. The band could then work towards creating an album which would not only encourage repertoire development and original composition, but also provide the band members with a new educational opportunity in seeing the creation of bluegrass music for commercial release to fulfillment. Now, on the admin side, the funding I had been awarded could be used to pay for mixing and mastering of the project, which could then be used for further recruitment. Even if the band did not perform publicly a single time, there was now a realistic goal for our students to work toward, which also represented a large-scale assessment necessary for a collegiate course. Now, this would demonstrate that our students were still learning during a time of uncertainty. Now, during that year, academic transformation and budget cuts were striking West Virginia University, and our band was truly concerned with being cut permanently. We watched other, more involved professors like our jazz faculty be fired, and the threats loomed in our mind. And as such, the idea of having something to present to our administration to demonstrate the validity of our program was always a concern. Now, that spring 2024 semester was tumultuous, to say the least. As I've mentioned, we were able to rehearse and perform, but the band stagnated. We basically played the exact same material with the exact same undergraduates because all we could do at that point, in between our own grief and our schedules, was find time to maintain it. But despite that, we limped into May of 2024, having successfully performed several times, having rehearsed, and having kept our flame alive, though it was sputtering and in need of kindling. We reached summer break and rested up, and as I was recovering and finally putting some time between this tragic incident and myself, I also planned the next steps of this recording project. And crazy ideas turned into crazy timelines, which were then advised into realistic timelines, which then turned into schedules which manifested in a curriculum plan. But first, we took July to breathe, to attend Clifftop, and to make ourselves anew. It was tragically, desperately, and truly needed. That fall, we returned, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and also with a new instructor. In the lull of the summer months, Christopher Haddix was identified to run the ensemble. Now, Professor Haddix was a College of Design professor. He works in sustainable design and green engineering, but after budget cuts and then a consolidated merge of two colleges, he existed in the administrative line of command where the Bluegrass Band already was. Now, a side project he had been doing was to research the music in the southern coal fields of West Virginia, and therefore it made him not only first one known to the College of Music in the first place, but also the most knowledgeable professor on the topic. And so the administration asked if he'd pick up the course. Haddix also knew Travis Steimling and was honored to shoulder the load. Now, despite this perfect storm of administrative position and academic background, he had never run a bluegrass band in this context. And so in the summer, he reached out to me. We made the plan to implement my curriculum design for the fall semester, which would provide the band with a goal to work towards. This would simultaneously allow Chris to observe the band in hopes of building a rapport, and also to learn the ropes of instruction working towards that goal. This was not a perfectly smooth transition. Chris struggled really at first to find a way of instructing the other students that resonated with them, and I personally struggled with relinquishing this administrative role that I had been shouldering for almost a year at that point. Now, despite this, the clear goal of a recording date, which we scheduled pretty much week 1 of the semester, moved us forward. And so Chris started coordinating performances for the group, and by the end of the semester, not only did the band feel the most like it had before Travis had died almost at that point, 14 months prior, but the recording date was upon us. So we put our headphones on, we mic'd up our fiddles, and hit record that day, laying enough material for an EP at minimum. And now I would love to speak of this really beautiful project and give you some links to the release on streaming in hopes of singing some praises of a band that overcame the odds. But this was a disaster. The band was nervous and it struggled to get takes that were releasable. There were a couple of reasons for this, primarily that many of our members were still beginners, including our instructor. Our experienced students were now further along in their music education degree program and were suffering from an incredibly specific and incredibly debilitating kind of stress. And after several recording sessions, no one was really happy with this material. No performances from this project were ever released, though a couple of selections did go through a very light and very rough mixing process before eventually being scrapped. Now, we may be tempted to call this a resounding failure. We set a goal to record an album and were unable to do so. However, I view this as a complete and total success. Because of this long-term goal, we were able to integrate an entire new class of string band musicians into the program, encourage, aid, and then select the administration to find a faculty advisor, and then guide that faculty advisor into an effective transition for running the program. Now, we did get lucky with Christopher Haddix and the college merge, but if he had not been identified, we had already secured an entire year's worth of instruction through that session band plan with Swiger and I. Our students were still given new experiences in the form of the recording studio. They were forced to think critically about repertoire selection alongside arrangement decisions, and they were presented with chances to execute on the skills they developed. So academically, this who cares if we didn't quite nail it on tape? At this point, I certainly didn't. Each semester after this, Christopher Haddix became more comfortable with running the band and recruited more students. In spring of 2025, Chris and I coordinated an outreach tour to the eastern panhandle of West Virginia, the first of its kind in nearly 4 years. A personal joy of mine was getting to play at my family's farm actually for that. And at the end of this 3-day tour, the band capped off a 2-hour independent show where they not only navigated a rain delay, a sudden change, an event location, and an encore. So, from a complete lack of plan, coordinator, or advisor, to the ability to perform 2 hours of material, give an encore, run educational programming, and adapt on the fly to the changing circumstances that are always presented in live music, I would define our student-led efforts as extremely successful, right? But to me, this story shows us the fragility of string bands in higher education. Oftentimes, these programs do or can just run on the back of one person. As a result of sabbatical or accident, these bands can and may disappear forever. So as we near the end of my presentation today, I want to first share that I hope this never happens to any of you. I would not wish this kind of suffering upon my worst enemy, especially for those of you who knew Travis personally. But despite this, we're going to not update Java on this computer, and then we're going to go to the right. Despite this, there will come a day when you decide to step down from your current position, and being ready for that day might be the difference between your program continuing, should you wish it to, and the sudden collapse of an institution. So to finish, I'd like to share a couple of things I observed during this process. I'm hoping here to provoke general reflection on how to manage transition, resource, and personnel in your program, though all of our situations are different, and so don't feel like you have to take my words as gospel. So first, and actually we were talking about this at lunch with Evie about resource management, all of the resources that Travis had compiled in multiple decades of being a renowned roots music scholar were located on like eCampus pages, which then closed at the end of the course semester. So we were forced to start from the ground up in compiling all sorts of material, right? So if you run a program, particularly if you're the only person involved, I wonder what would happen if you made a public backup of the public resources you have and made it accessible to your students after your class. Shout out Evie, because that's what we were doing at lunch. With regards to personnel, if you haven't thought about who your substitute teacher would or could be, I wonder what would happen if you took a second to really think about that. Mull that over and maybe make those contacts known to your students or to your administration as local experts. With regards to transition, with the 2 questions of resource and personnel answered, I wonder what it would look like to ease the reins of control on rehearsal and provide student opportunities to lead, which I've had the lovely conversation with all of you were doing in various capacities, or specifically to invite possible collaborators or future instructors to concerts, rehearsals, or along trips. As you think about stepping down, I'm thinking about this less nowadays because it's these kinds of questions I brought to my current higher education ensemble, the Ohio State String Band. You're currently looking at our first cohort. You can tell I'm very excited about this group, which under my direction is practicing string band music for the first time. Our syllabus, as you can see on the left, though it's very small, has a living list of public resources, which is compiled from YouTube links and things like that. And for non-public resources, I've got citations and make it really clear. My students can access these materials through our library systems, and chances are I might even have one that I'm willing to let them borrow. So the WVU band is doing fine. And in fact, actually, they're doing very well. This student-led response, coupled with a supportive administration, allowed us to ensure an effective transition to a new era of our program. The people first, music second mentality that Travis Steinling installed on the program paid dividends as the community invested back in itself during the tragedy. And I speak to you today not in providing a global list of solutions, but promoting an open dialogue about the real nature of tragedy, transition, and the curriculum in your program, regardless of what that looks like. Ultimately, if you do find yourself in a jeopardized program, identify a concrete, reasonable goal to unify those involved. Now, recording an album is one option, particularly if you have the equipment to do so, but public performance is another. But I won't wish this learning process on anyone. It was an incredible volume of grief, confusion, and panic to process, but despite this, I've grown through this process and found a really bigger purpose in life through teaching this music. It's also the reason I'm currently able to run a band like this while I'm in graduate school. So as I finish up today, I hope you take a second and learn from WU's programs and join me in remembering Travis Steinling through your educational approach and always and forever, people first, music second. I saw your hand first.
But since you're at Ohio State, you're in a good position to do a comparative case study of what happened with the Denison University Bluegrass Ensemble with the abrupt departure of Andy Carlson, who had started and created that ensemble, and it also found a way to continue.
Yeah,
That'd be valuable for your if you're going to continue to write about it.
Yeah, I would. This project, honestly, I'm gonna be really frank about this project. I'm so glad that it is behind me. I speak to you all today in the fact that I think this is a serious message we should be honest about. But I will say, I attended Denison University's String Band Day this year. They had East Nashgrass come in one for a free masterclass. I think they had over 100 community members come out for their band scramble. It was so big that they had like 9 bands with like 8 to 10 people each for this masterclass. So Denison University and WVU, I think, have bounced back very far. And I'd love to talk to Adam Schenker, who's running that program now, and see what our transitional experience looked like. So thank you for pointing me in that direction.
Um, it's really interesting because at the time that Travis passed, he was a really close friend and mentor to me, and also a person who was listed as a recommender on all of the job applications that I was sending out when I was job searching in a non-permanent position.
Mm-hmm.
And so I knew that I was leaving the position where I had established a string band, something like that. And I remember thinking when I heard news about Travis, like, I wonder what their students are going to do. And so it's so cool to hear this story. I will tell you, because I had the benefit of knowing that I was going to be leaving soon, even if I didn't know where. One of the things that we did in preparation for that was we registered the art ensemble as an official student organization.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Which allowed them to have their own bank account.
Yeah.
And also have the possibility to reserve spaces. We found somebody else who immediately agreed to be the staff advisor when I left. And they had their own bank account. They had all the things to access. Even though they need to do that while it's still there, it made that transition when I left so much easier. We're able to find another outlet to teach that class, but ultimately it made things a lot easier knowing that that security was already built in if something wasn't happening. This totally was on my mind. So Thank you for sharing.
I'm honored to share. I don't think I got really choked up earlier thinking about that. I will say we're working on getting the Ohio State String Band as a student org right now, where this was the first semester. The student org, one of the big things that really sucked in our first year without Travis was that the year before we had been awarded, from my understanding, several $1,000s and a couple of grants that we had gotten things, and then suddenly we as students had no clue how much there was, had no clue who to get it, and there is so much of this story that obviously can't fit in here, but I'll say 12 weeks before Travis died was the day one of a brand new school of music director at WVU. And so we had an entire administration who had no clue who the adjuncts were, had no clue what courses they taught, had no clue who the people, what it looked like in that. They didn't know where those things were. And so the amount of perfect storm that this really created, and then especially for a guy who was trying to use Travis's recommendation letters to apply for graduate school at that moment, um, it's a lot. The student org is one thing I didn't get to mention. Highly recommend doing that, especially if your university gives funds every year, which might be an opportunity for, at no cost to your specific program, to maybe bring in a guest artist. And sometimes it's $500 a semester, which is still a workable amount if you're really clever, even if it's just some refreshments for your performance. We have time for one more? Yep.
The coffee garage.
Ooh, oh, then this is high stakes.
And first of all, it's amazing what you did, and you told the story from afar. Bravo. But I was Department Chair of Music and then Department Chair of Drama at my institution for 12 years total. We had probably 3 or 4 situations. We did have 2 deaths and then just retirements.
Yeah.
And also graduate students
Mhm.
who started these great things and
And
then
then,
finished
yeah, bounce.
and got jobs. And so it's what some of your sort of general recommendations about thinking long term. It's a little bit related to the previous 2 talks.
Yeah.
So ensembles like this at schools that aren't ETSU,
Mhm.
eclectic or whatever
Yeah.
you call them, they're fragile.
They really are.
And university administrative perspective, you know, if the marching band director takes off, then there's no question there's a search immediately. And that's all, and the budgets are there.
Yep.
But all of these, I mean, klezmer ensembles and
Other
little theater
groups.
things, design groups that we had, technology groups, and stuff, they're really fragile. And so I think some of these things that you say about thinking about whether it's the student organization room or just remembering that campus files go away.
They
with
do.
The person who made them. I mean, it's so hard.
It's
Or I just wanted to kind of reinforce that and say, you know, I really appreciate the way. Well, I really appreciate what you did. But then just kind of thinking through it and clarifying how important all that is.
Yeah. Thank you so much. The only way out was through. Like, so for real, I was a junior. I'd played banjo for 18 months. And you know what you do, that you just go play at every single jam all week. And I'll tell you what, if you are a 21-year-old man who is willing to cry in public in front of the director of the School of Music, it is really hard to stop you. It is so hard to stop you. And I think that when we were approaching the administration, since we had these new directors, and Travis was really well known in our community, people wanted to support but didn't know how. And so with tragedy, the fact that I was designing and was like, oh, it's really only for me because I really want to play the banjo. That just made things a little easier. I see Lee encroaching on me. I believe there is